All right, well, here's my final essay for Intro to Business Law.
Introduction. The majority of Americans got their rights as working people in 1964 with the passage of the Civil Rights Act. For young people today who were not yet alive during the civil rights movement, what happened in society and where they stand in the historical timeline can seem all too distant. They fail to understand how the things in society that happened with the horrific history of the United States, how sorely oppressed people were, and thus take advantage of the freedoms behest to them with little understanding of the dangerous forces that they face from their predecessors. History. Throughout American history there has been an ongoing legacy of violence towards all peoples. America began to act in a violent way starting with the arrival of colonial ships from Britain, which delivered an ongoing influx of settlers. Many of these new arrivals to North America chose to engage in acts of extreme violence against the continent's indigenous peoples. A long and gruesome genocide has taken place against these peoples. There are Indian residential schools with unmarked graves where the children are still being identified. Stacy, 2022. There are still people walking around among us who were direct victims of the horrendous violence that took place in these schools. The topic of these residential schools is a sensitive subject for this reason, and it is because of the trauma it has caused within the indigenous communities. People still suffer many abuses in the United States that have resulted from the legacy of violence that has taken place here. There was one very specific demographic in the United States that has historically and continues to perpetrate such violence against the population that has become the residents of this continent. A population of blacks has also taken up residency in the United States. These people were many of the first but not the last to have experienced life as slaves on this continent. The breadth of the atrocities that has taken place on this continent is vast. It spans across the majority of the population as its victims. The victims of these atrocities leave in their wake predecessors who face historical trauma and adversity. There are a variety of impacts this trauma has on a person, to include depression, cardiovascular disease, and overall poor health. U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, 2023. From a lack of ability to attain housing to unequal pay, the plethora of challenges marginalized peoples have to face in America are vast. January 31, 1865, the 13th Amendment was passed into law abolishing slavery in the United States. National Archives, 2023. People fail to understand that the passage of the 13th Amendment did not truly get rid of slavery. It has persisted and continues to persist within the United States. The groups who have been marginalized by the atrocities that have taken place throughout American history continue to struggle against this ongoing legacy of white supremacy that this nation was founded on. Even though slavery was technically abolished, racial aggression continued after its abolishment in forms such as segregation, housing discrimination, and more. It is a little-known fact that the 13th Amendment included a clause allowing for slavery in the case of imprisonment. Though many may believe slavery was abolished with the creation of the 13th Amendment, few understand it is still legal and thriving in this country. Matos and Hodge, 2021. Slavery was not abolished, it is still legal, and the United States is still guilty of slavery. The loophole in the 13th Amendment has resulted in further oppression of persons of color, especially the black population. Once slavery was abolished, this loophole was just used as an excuse to make accusations and false arrests of colored people in the United States. Impact. Nobody in America has truly been able to avoid the harms of the ongoing legacy of violence and hate in this country except for the ethnocentric Caucasian male when it comes to demographics. From 1942 to 1946, America kept Japanese residents in concentration camps against their will. National Archives and Records Administration, 2023. Women, historically in the United States, were considered property of their husbands. Their husbands were allowed to beat them, they were not allowed to own property, not allowed to learn how to read, and were also slaves in America but not called slaves. Twin Cities PBS, 2020. Still today we can see echoes of the mistreatment of women in modern misogyny. In today's America, women are frequently dehumanized and treated as alien and disabled. A population referred to as Latinos, or Mexicans, who were residing in the southern half of the United States and could also be considered indigenous Americans, were also tortured with the seizure of lands and violence that has taken place. In today's world, these people are commonly used as modern-day low-wage slaves by the United States. They are taken advantage of and not given the ability to pursue their rights and have a safe place to call home. It was only in 2015 mass graves of these migrant workers were found in the state of Texas, but the state of Texas maintains that their action in murdering and burying these people is legal. Frey, 2015. It is important that we understand the history of what has taken place in America. This gives context to many of the things we see and experience today and really lets us know where we are at as individuals and what is taking place in our lives. It really is a shame that our own history is not made available for the people who live here to know in our schools. American public schools focus more on propaganda and American exceptionalism than the truth. So many people today are still impacted from the things that have happened and don't understand the truths of how dense this situation we are all in really is. The civil rights movement started in 1954. The aim of this movement was to abolish legal discrimination, segregation and disenfranchisement of peoples residing within the United States. Wikipedia, 2023. During the civil rights movement, all of these marginalized people fought for the rights we have today. This was during my grandmother's time and was not long ago. There are still bad attitudes and things that are passed down to this generation of people that harm Americans fighting for their freedom from all of this. Current affairs. There are still threats we face as a people. All things considered, it would be fair to assume the amount of people that have faced the systemic torture that has taken place in America's history far outnumber those who still aim to keep it that way. It is hard to understand why so many of today's youth don't see the need to stand up for or defend our rights and our freedoms. One can only speculate on the cause of lack of political activity we see today. Some people seem very afraid that if you challenge the government or its policies that you are doomed to failure. Others seem to just not understand and maybe don't have a truthful education as to the real history of how horrendous America's legacy has been. We currently have very high substance abuse rates in this nation as well, so that may also be a contributing factor. There are some very real problems we as people face here in this country that need resolved still. With the current economic scenario we are in post-pandemic, there is a lot of people struggling right now. The cost of housing is unrealistic for many, it's hard to afford groceries and take care of our basic needs. Yet for some reason there are still people out there who feel like they need to oppress and steal and hurt others to survive. According to David Richards in his TED Talk, Violence Against Women and the Law, the total cost to the American economy resulting from violence against women totals at roughly about $5,800,000,000. This is only a small example of the impact of the social mistreatment that continues within the United States today. It does not make people happier, it hurts the economy, it raises crime rates. Overall, hate and bigotry does nothing more than make everyone miserable and make life very hard for all of us. If you do research on the cost of different variations of hate and marginalization, you will see time and time again this behavior is not productive. It stifles economic growth, creates violence and suffering, and prevents innovation. It is important that as we reflect on all of this that we do not allow our perspectives to become skewed and allow ourselves as individuals to become hateful oppressors. We need to remember that through the history of all of this there has been people from all classes who have stood up for the rights of the oppressed, and that includes some of the colonizers. Caucasian men are not the cause of the problems we face solely. It is ethnocentrics and misogynists that enact these oppressions. Summary. We need to remember what our ancestors fought so hard for. Even something so simple as the unemployment program, people were shot trying to get that enacted into law. Congress has been recently revealing actions that have taken place within several federal programs that operate at a state level that are having disparate impact. The Social Security Administration, EPA, DHS, Department of Labor and other offices have failed to serve the public in recent times. Whether it be for personal gain or a lack of ability, this presents itself as a problem. It is so very important we remember how hard people had to fight to get us these freedoms and not let them simply be taken away. Americans need to take personal responsibility for what takes place in their politics. References: Frey, J. 2015, July 16. Mass graves of immigrants found in Texas, but state says no laws were broken. Retrieved December 3, 2023, from https://www.democracynow.org/2015/7/16/mass_graves_of_immigrants_